What's up? What's up? Is my mic on? Hello?
Hello, hello?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Cheers.
Testing 1 2. Testing 1 2. Can I borrow yours?
Oh, I can see us.
Hello? Testing 1 2. Testing 1. Yeah, what's up? Can you guys hear me okay? Cool. So this is the Mempools panel. My name is Wiz. I'm the co-founder of the Mempool open source project and operator of the mempool.space block explorer website. And this is the Mempool panel where we're going to bore you guys to death and blab on for hours about the Mempool. These are some really cool shadowy supercoder cypherpunk people we're very fortunate to have here today. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks. My name is Sergey Kotler. I'm the founder and CEO of Bitrefill. Many of you probably know what we do. We let you buy anything you want with.
Cool. I think I'm okay. My name's Gloria. I work on Bitcoin Core, mostly in the Mempool code base and surrounding areas such as Mempool validation, transaction relay, and mining. When I say, as a preface, when I say the Mempool, people often on Twitter say I don't know what I'm talking about. I mean the Mempool as in the code base area, just to say that. And I'm founded by Brink, which is a nonprofit dedicated to Bitcoin research and development.
Hi, I'm Merch. When I talk about the mempool, I mean the transactions that are unconfirmed and are shared between all the different nodes that run and have their own unique perspective on the mempool, which just overlaps largely. So the mempool is an abstract concept that just treats this overlap. And I used to stare a lot more at the mempool when I was at BitGo as a backend coins team member, because we had so many customers that would get stuck transactions or just needed advice when and how they should send their transactions. Now I'm at Chaincode Labs, and well, I'm still interested in Mempool, and yeah, I sometimes do the Mempool weather report.
Yeah, we love those Mempool weather reports from Merch. You haven't done any in a while though. Maybe if we ask real nice, he'll do one for us today. But let's start with the basics. Sergey, do you want to just break it down for everyone who's not already familiar? What is a mempool? Why do Bitcoin nodes have them? How do they work? Why are we so interested in the mempools?
So there's a lot there. I mean, the basic thing is that when you send a Bitcoin transaction, it doesn't go right into a block, right? Where does it go? It goes into the mempool. So the mempool is the pool of transactions that are waiting to be confirmed into a block. So a Bitcoin node will receive a transaction. It will check if it's valid, put it in the mempool. Gloria will elaborate on this stuff. And it will pass it around to all the other Bitcoin nodes that it knows of. So there's each has its own perspective, but there's also some level of shared knowledge of what are the transactions that are waiting to be confirmed. And so, I mean, from my perspective as CEO, technical CEO of a company that makes many Bitcoin transactions and have customers making Bitcoin transactions to us, especially back in 2017, when the transaction fees were really high, it became, I mean, really financially important, because we were spending thousands and tens of thousands, even on dollars, on transaction fees almost on a daily basis. And so it created a strong incentive to keep an eye, right? Because the most important thing is that the mempool is sorted by the fee rate, right? So that transaction that has a higher transaction fee will be sorted higher, and it's going to be prioritized first by the miners, which are then working based on financial incentives, right? But then it becomes important to to set a fee that is just high enough, no, but not too high, because then you're wasting money, right? But not too low, because then the transaction is not going to go through, maybe ever, or maybe in a long time, right? And so fine-tuning that is super important. And I mean, this is something that's gotten infinitely better in the past years. But that's kind of how my interest got sparked into it. And I still do, as a habit, even though the mempool isn't as crazy as it used to be, I still watch it all. I was showing the people. I have it on my phone. Yeah, you know, in my Safari. Yeah, just to keep an eye on, like, because you can see a lot of stuff in the mempool of like what is going on, who's making the transactions, what are they doing, where are they going. You know, you learn a lot of stuff. Yeah, from watching it. I think it's fun.
That's a good way to put it. It's kind of like the transaction queue of the Bitcoin network, where whenever you use Bitcoin, it just goes into there first, and it's this very interesting area to monitor and visualize, right? But one thing you mentioned that was really interesting is how high the transactions fees got last year. Actually, this is a good question for Merch. And maybe I think we have a slide for this, the history of the last year. Could you guys show that first slide? It's basically the Mempool chart of the last 3 years. Merch, do you want to give us your nice weather report? What's going on in this chart?
Well, more of an historical weather overview. So in the last year, we had the interesting situation that from mid-December, 15th of December until 2nd of June, the mempool never fully cleared. So there was always at least one block worth of transactions waiting to be confirmed. And for some time of that, even the default mempool limit overflowed. I think we're going to touch on that a little later, maybe. And so the colors that you see here, hopefully, yes. So the lowest bar is, you see color bands here, right? And the color bands are fee rates, and the size of the bands indicate how much data is waiting to be included in blocks. So at the bottom, you have this pinkish tone there. That's just over default min relay fee, which is 1 Satoshi per V byte of transaction data. And then I think yellow goes up to like 30, 40, or even
100.
Well,
Yeah,
100. So generally, the mempool is just a visualization, or this chart we're looking at here is a visualization of the waiting queue of payment promises to be turned into payments by being included in blocks.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy last year. I think it was around December of, I guess, 2020 when we saw the fees start to rise and the mempool was just congested all the time until about the Miami conference last year, right? Was right around when it emptied out. And during that whole time, it was just totally congested. And sometimes you pay like as much as like 300 sats per V byte just to get into the next block, like $20 US just to do an ordinary Bitcoin transaction. It was really a unique time in Bitcoin's history, I think. We hadn't really seen that kind of sustained fee market really before.
And just to point out, sorry, there's a common expression, there is no the mempool. And likewise, this chart that you are seeing is not a canonical view of like the mempool of the Bitcoin network, right? This is just Wiz's node, which happens to have a very large max mempool size. But I don't know if you guys can still see. Oh, if you could bring up the chart again, sorry. I think it goes up to like 400, it goes up to like 200 million virtual bytes, but actually the default mempool size is 300 megabytes, and a lot of that is taken up by metadata, 75% in fact. So most mempools, like ordinary non-Wiz nodes and not mining nodes on the network, are only keeping up to like 75 million virtual bytes worth of transactions. So they actually wouldn't even see the peak of those mountains. But of course, actually, they're keeping the top section of the fee rate, not the bottom.
Yeah, and I think we have a slide of what that looks like. Can you go to the next one to see what a normal node's mempool looked like last year? Yeah, this is it. Corey, you want to walk us through what we're looking at here?
Yeah, so in April or so, right, they're purging all of the, so okay, Sergey mentioned that we sort the mempool in transactions based on their fee rate, right? And I guess the first thing I probably want to mention is individual fee rate is not what matters. Ancestor package fee rate is what matters. So in Bitcoin, we have a unique transaction structure where it's made of inputs and outputs, right? We all know what the UTXO-based structure is. So you can have transactions dependent upon each other inside of the mempool. So you can be spending a UTXO that doesn't exist in the blockchain, but it exists in a transactions that's still in the mempool. That makes sense, right? Hopefully everybody understands that.
But how did the Bitcoin network change during this time of consistently high fee rate environment and transactions getting purged? Like, what was the experience like for a normal Bitcoin user at this time?
Yeah, so I think if you had a 1 sat per VByte transaction that you broadcast around April or so, and as the mempool filled up, your transaction was probably purged by most of the mempools, most of the nodes as mempools.
Right, because there's this common belief that you can just always send a transaction at 1 sat per VByte fee rate, and eventually it'll get confirmed. But this is a common misconception, right? I mean, if the mempool is constantly full, your low fee transactions will get purged out of the mempool. And
there are other Mempools that have lots of it.
True.
And they do rebroadcast. Like when it goes down, you can see if we bring up the chart again. But like,
not look at us.
When,
Let's look at the
when
chart.
it goes down from the peak, you can see like over there. It's like some of the transactions are coming back actually. Like on the right half,
right.
You can see that the pink ones are coming back up. Right.
Right.
Which,
So the red color
may
is,
or may not be.
The red color is like 1 sat per VByte, and that light blue color is like maybe what, 20-ish. So after all the higher fee rate transactions around 20 sats per VByte got confirmed, then you can see the low fees of 1 sat per VByte started to get rebroadcasted in the network. And that's, so how did Bitrefill handle that during that time? Like, don't you guys allow people to buy gift cards with like zero-conf transactions in the mempool? Like, how did you guys handle this?
Well, this is exactly why we have to do that, right? Because otherwise the customer might be stuck forever and ever and have a horrible experience and support tickets and confused refunds and exchange rate issues. There's like a whole mess. So I mean, again, like 2017, when this was even worse, crazy than it was on the chart here. Yeah, it was a kind of a formative time for us. We were really like struggling. And at the time, we were mainly doing low-value phone refill transactions. You know, so like the typical like $5, $10 transactions. And I mean, we've done a lot of things. You know, we developed like that we ourselves recommend a fee rate for the customer, right? So we like our web server monitors this or our version of this. And based on that computes a recommendation that we give to the customer. And these days, most wallets do that automatically, but we also sort of like make sure.
But isn't that a huge risk for your business? I mean, if I go on your Bitrefill site and buy an Amazon gift card for like $1,000 and send you a low fee transaction.
That's RBF-able.
Well, if it's RBF-able, then we're not going to do the zero conf, and then you're going to have a bad user experience. But if you do that, then presumably you're savvy enough to be able to fix the bad user experience yourself. But I mean, the risk factor. I mean, people think that Bitcoin transactions are when they're unconfirmed are trivially reversible. And that's not true, at least not today. You know, you need to collude with miners.
Would you guys agree with that statement?
I think it has been shown that if you're willing to put in the effort, you can very successfully double spend transactions even after they've been broadcast. But you do have to really put in some effort right now.
We don't accept just any transaction, right? There's a bit of magic going on where we check and vet and make sure, right? So, I mean, the low-hanging fruit stuff that you have in mind, I mean, you know, the goal isn't to double spend it, the goal is just to trick us, right, into believing that we got the money where we didn't, right? That's the trick. And I mean, we've been doing this for 7 years now. I think it has happened in 7 years 1 or 2 times, and we do like, you know, more than 100,000 transactions every month, you know, so like, and compare that to credit cards where you like standard fraud rate is like 5% and you know, it's like a cost of doing business. So, and here it's like twice ever. And like, it was because of bugs that we fixed.
I think it's still important to distinguish, though. It's a little bit of a gentleman's agreement not to do it, and there's no tools to do it easily. There's a very few people that would have the knowledge and maybe connections to reliably double spend. And so, yeah, I agree that from a business perspective and planning and like risk factors, you can discard that risk for the most part. But fundamentally, from how the mempool works, there are some policies that help with this, but it's not actually, while a transaction is unconfirmed, it is unreliable. And it just so happens that the policies and the behavior of our society, our Bitcoin society, tends to confirm with our needs in regard to.
Well, no, there's thieves and hackers and crooks that use Bitcoin as well. So it's not just the nice people at the Bitcoin conference.
Yeah, fair. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
also you have customer accounts, right? It's not that people are completely.
No, not customer. Well, we do, but that's not related to this.
All right.
Yeah, I'd love to continue talking about mempool attacks because
Yes,
the first time we met, for me, I mean, we all know that transaction relay in a distributed system is like notoriously unreliable, and I think I know more than anyone that there's tons of attacks and it's a dangerous place. And so when I first met you and you said you accept zero-conf transactions, we had a very heated debate about whether or not that's safe. And I think you did manage to convince me that for you at least, it's difficult to convince the logic on top of your Bitcoin operation that you are going to be double spending.
Yeah, it sounds like if you're going to be sending $1 million to someone, you might want to wait for 6 or 12 confirmations on the Bitcoin blockchain. But for your particular threat model, where you're selling gift cards of relatively small denominations, and mitigating the double spend risks, like you said, no RBF, they have to use a reasonably high fee rate, et cetera, et cetera. It sounds like you figured out how to manage this risk for your business.
And I mean, let's be very, very, very clear here. I in no way say that you should rely on unconfirmed transactions.
Yeah, don't do that.
It's advanced level kung fu. You need to have people that do it and spend hours figuring it out, monitoring it, evaluating, improving it, and so on. It's something that you can do if you're a company and you have people working on this full time. It's not something for the common man. Right, but there's also, I mean, it depends. If your buddy is paying you back $10 for lunch, you don't have to sit there. You can set it to the low fee transaction, and in fact, for I think quite a few, I mean, maybe we can talk about the trustless aspect because I think it's very interesting about how Bitcoin is all about the trustless. But if you actually look at most actual Bitcoin transactions, there's always a very high degree of trust between the parties, right? In the sense of hey, we pay someone's salary in Bitcoin, right? Okay, we're not going to double spend our employee because then he's not going to go to work next week. Also, it's unethical and it's not normal human behavior, right? Mm-hmm. So for a lot of transactions, there is a mutual trust, right? And in that situation, you can set the mempool fee to 1 cent per byte, and it's going to confirm eventually. In worst case, if it happens that suddenly there's a big spike like that, well, then you'll figure it out. It's going to be a little bit of a hassle.
Yeah, I think that's the big takeaway is that the fee rate you use or whether you accept the transaction on 0-conf or 6-confs, it all really depends on your individual threat model and use case and amount of the transaction. It really depends. And so for some people, they can always send 1 sat per vbyte. Even if it takes a year to get confirmed, they'll wait because they just might be sending it between two of their same wallets and they know they're not going to double spend their own transaction. But if I want to say, hey, let's buy $1 million worth of gift cards, I'm pretty sure you won't accept the 0-conf for that, right? But what about layer 2 networks?
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to point out that all of this is assuming that transaction propagation is based on this perfectly fair fee rate market, where the higher the fee rate the transaction, the faster it's going to get mined. And that's not quite true.
Right, so how does that apply to Lightning, for example? If I have a Lightning node and I have to force close a channel, how do the fees work with that?
Yeah, okay, so this is something I spend a lot of my time thinking about because in all layer 2 contracts, you have a particular set of conditions that makes fees extremely important and dangerous. So one thing is, when you're doing a Lightning transaction, right, you and your counterparty are negotiating the fee rate well before you're ever going to broadcast it. Because the whole point is you're going to exchange these transactions and payments and only settle on chain if you really need to or when both of you decide to close the channel, right? So what really goes wrong is when you have a unilateral close, as in your counterparty is trying to cheat you, your counterparty went offline, whatever it is, something went wrong. So now you need to broadcast your transaction. And that might be hours, days, weeks after you decided what the fee rate on that transaction is going to be. And if your counterparty is trying to cheat you, there's no way you're going to sign an RBF with them because they're like, I'm trying to steal your money. Why would I give you another signature? And so that combination makes it quite dangerous. So for example, if we go back to the second slide, where the fee rate, the minimum fee rate of the mempool went from like 1 sat per vbyte to like 20 sats per vbyte. Let's say you open a Lightning channel and you have some HTLCs going, and you negotiated a fee rate of 10 or even 15 sats per vbyte on your commitment transaction. But then something goes wrong and you need to broadcast. Well, the commitment transaction will straight up not even make it into anyone's mempool. Maybe it will make it into Wiz's mempool because his is still, the floor is still 1 sat per vbyte. But for the most part, it's just not gonna work. And then you say, oh, Gloria, what about CPFP? Right? Commitment transactions have anchor outputs, so either counterparty in the Lightning channel should be able to attach a very high fee rate child to their commitment transaction. And newsflash, the first transaction will not make it in, and we're actually only validating transactions individually. So we'll reject the first one, we'll look at the high fee child, and we'll say, well, these inputs are not available because they belong to a transaction we rejected. And so, oops, sorry, neither of them are getting in.
So it sounds like Lightning has a pretty big security hole right now based on what you just said.
Exactly. This is why I'm excited to be here today, to tell you everything's broken and we need to fix it. No, but I think this particular issue, again, we have not seen a fee rate market like that since April of last year. And I'm not saying that there is a reliable attack that attackers can always execute. But if you think about it, as hundreds of billions of dollars of capital is locked into Lightning contracts and other L2 contracts, and the fee rate market or the usage of the mempool becomes less predictable. We're not able to say, oh, in 1 week's time or in 1 month's time, we know that there's going to be room in the mempool for a 10 sat per vbyte transaction. These attacks become more and more critical. And again, this is on a very long time horizon, right? So as protocol developers, we're thinking about something like this, where it's like, okay, when you're building an L2, hopefully there is a seamless interface between L2 and L1. And I think mempool is where that security assumption really breaks down. Because to put it simply, Lightning and all other L2 protocols have a security assumption that you will always be able to mitigate counterparty risk by broadcasting something on chain to revoke their funds or to get your justice transaction in. And that assumption is not always true. It's not always false, okay, not to scare everyone. But I think this is going to become more and more dangerous, and we need to fix it.
But also on the scaring part, like a normal Lightning wallet, when it opens a channel, it sets that fee pretty high. Right?
Yes.
So it sets it to a level such that it's relatively unthinkable, even if 2017 were to happen again, that it wouldn't even make it into people's mempools. It's definitely. I mean, you can imagine it happening, but it's like. It's unlikely,
Yes.
So essentially all the unilateral closes overpay heavily because they cannot, maybe to pick up your point from earlier, the only thing that has propagation guarantees in Bitcoin is blocks. We guaranteed that we will deliver blocks to other nodes so that everybody can catch up to the best chain tip. Transactions do not have propagation guarantees. We forward them at best effort. Generally, it means that all transactions get to all other nodes in a minute or so. And once they're in a block, of course, as part of the block, they do get propagated. But before that, the unconfirmed transactions do not have guarantees. But essentially, the L2s rely on the assumption that there are guarantees for transaction propagation. So that's where the problem comes in.
Sergey, I think you run a pretty large Lightning node for your business. Can you tell us any stories? Has Bitrefill ever seen anyone trying to steal funds out of a Lightning channel during that time? I guess it was April of last year. Did you see any shenanigans?
Probably not.
No, we've had shenanigans, but they're like someone made a mistake and accidentally, their wallet started doing stuff, and so our things slapped them and so on. And then the person reached out and said, "Hey, I fucked up. You gotta help me out," and we help out. But I think it's also like important to keep in mind again, like we talked about, that like a financial transaction has a level of trust, right? So for example, at Bitrefill, like our biggest channels are going to be with other companies, right?
True.
So we'll have a big channel or multiple channels with Strike, with Bitfinex, Blue Wallet, Asank, and so on, right? And so it's not like, Bitcoin is built for like the Wild West, every man for themselves. But like
right.
in reality, most of it isn't, right? Just because imaginably we could, with a very sophisticated attack like this, rob our good friends at Strike of money, doesn't mean that we do. We have business, common human decency and so on. So it depends. And Lightning channels have a certain trust factor in them by default, in that you kind of rely on the person like keeping their node up and running and not doing anything stupid and so on, which is like a weak trust, right? But there is a little bit of a type of trust. You don't trust them with your money, but you trust them to not mess things up.
I think we actually see this in many layer 2 networks, or maybe more broadly, technologies built on top of Bitcoin, where there's not only the anarchist trust of the base layer blockchain. For example, if I had a channel open with you, and for some reason my node got messed up, and you had to like force close the channel, and you got those funds, we have some kind of reputation or relationship together. I would say, hey, can you, let's settle up properly. I think this is quite common, like you said, in the B2B space, where Bitcoin banks essentially have very large channels between each other, or Bitcoin payment processors, or merchants selling gift cards, et cetera. And I think this is one part of the maybe to mitigate the risk in a different way from what you mentioned earlier. Okay, sure, Lightning has some security holes, or threat models maybe need to be adjusted for when the mempool gets full all the time. But one of these mitigations is actually the social, maybe capital part of it.
Okay, yeah, sure. But like, just maybe to play devil's advocate, or to provide a perspective of someone who is trying to design our policy rules and our mempool for the node runners that are using a Raspberry Pi, the people in countries where this is the most free option for them to transact, and their government is actively trying to censor, or someone is trying to censor or freeze their ability to use money for whatever it is that they need, that may or may not be politically accepted there, right? Like, we want the default option to be as minimal as possible, as private as possible, as censorship resistant as possible. So of course there are many scenarios where there is a social aspect, or there is a legal framework with which people can use to externally to the Bitcoin and Lightning assumptions to figure out how they're going to transact. I think the most private, censorship resistant, blah, 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 option should be the default.
I strongly agree. I mean,
Yeah.
with everything that you say and with everything that you do is super important. I mean, we're building Bitcoin to survive in wartime, right? I just sort of added in there because maybe people get the impression that
Right.
shit if fees goes up, all of my money is going to be stolen from Lightning.
Right.
And that's not necessarily the case, you know.
I mean,
but we're talking about a sort of a risk that is theoretical, highly unlikely, requires a sophisticated attacker in a special set of circumstances. We need to fix that risk, right? And that's what you're doing.
Yes.
And the great people at Lightning and so on. Yeah, but you know, it's important to know.
I like that we have
how exposed you are. Yeah.
Balanced voices on this panel.
I want to jump in here now too. So, I mean, it's easy to build a trusted relationship on a default of no trust necessary, right? You can sort of upgrade your relationship with somebody else by adding a trusted relationship, and then you can do more things than with the default. But yeah, it is important that it works for well, Bitcoin is the money of enemies, right? Taj said that. Very nice.
So do you recommend someone to open a, would you recommend someone to open a Lightning channel with their enemy?
No, I don't think that you do open yourself up to a little bit of abuse if you have a Lightning channel with someone. They can make it hard for you to get your money back. They can grief you for the fees for opening the channels and things like that. But generally, so we have the base layer where you don't have to need a lot of trust. And then, of course, you can build business relationships on that, and you can do more with that. It's sort of like we have a very simple, stupid base layer in Bitcoin, and then we build the complex things at the edges and on top, because it's easier to go that direction than vice versa. Going from a trust necessary to an untrusted, would you want to open a bank account with somebody that you know is going to try to steal money from you?
But I mean, nobody suggested that here.
No. I'm just illustrating.
Yeah, and obviously, hopefully nobody gets the impression that I'm criticizing Lightning or thinking that they're building too fast. But I think in Bitcoin, we have more of a philosophy of building bottom up. So we have our base layer, no trust required, as security model is as difficult as possible. And then we're slowly building up to a scalable payment system that can handle the thousands of transactions per second that honestly we cannot fit into a block right now, right? So we cannot afford to not build Lightning or some scaling solution. But the way that I think we do things, what I like about Bitcoin development is we build bottom up and we put security first. I think that's the way we should think about things and what I really like.
I think we covered a lot of the very interesting past of the mempool, historical data trends, and now we just kind of touched on the present state of the mempool and how it affects various threat models for various use cases. But what about the future? Mert, you usually give us like a weather report of what's going on in the mempool. Like, how about a prediction? What's the future weather report for the mempool? What do you think is going to happen? How is the mempool going to change over time?
That's very interesting, and I've been thinking about that. But I don't know. But so from the stats that I'm seeing, I think that the number of payments has been growing pretty steadily. The amount of money that is being sent has been growing pretty steadily. And what led to this congestion in the last year was that there were just more and more transactions, and eventually the block space was completely getting used. And the block space supply is pretty inelastic. While you're slightly below it, it'll clear every night or at least every weekend, and the fees will calm down again. As soon as you overshoot a little bit and the number of transactions that get submitted to the network exceed the available block space, it'll just continue growing, right? Because there's not enough new block space to clear it out. And so we had a bit of a demand shock after.
Right, the market was
first
pumping.
We had a supply shock, and then we had a demand shock. First, China kicked out their miners, and the hash rate went down by 47%, I think, at the peak. And then just around the same time, blockchain.com, who is responsible for about 30% of all transactions, finally updated from pay-to-public key hash addresses to pay-to-witness public key hash. So the inputs went from 148 bytes to 68 V bytes on each input. So they were less than half the size. And suddenly this being slightly over the block space demand went to, oh, we're like at 90-ish% of the block space being used, and fees dropped through the floor. And then the hash rate regenerated maybe even faster than some people expected. Some people were like, it'll take a year for all these companies to resettle. And
no, they were heavily incentivized to get those miners as soon as possible.
So blocks were coming faster and transactions were smaller, at least, blockchain.com's.
So in a way, I think we'll see a couple more demand shocks. For example, with pay to Taproot, it took now almost 5 years, but we're at 83% SegWit transactions now. And with Taproot, I assume a similar pattern. It'll take a few years for use cases to come up. But then especially for multisig will be a lot cheaper to do with key path spends on pay to Taproot. And key path spend in pay to Taproot is only 58 V bytes, whereas, for example, at 203 multisig, even with native SegWit right now, is 105. So, or older formats are 140 or 297 for legacy even. So the demand from multisig transactions will go down a bunch. And then Lightning is actually maturing maybe a little quicker than so for example, Rusty said, building Lightning will be a 20-year effort. And now people are reporting that they're routing thousands of transactions only through their own node that they're administering from home. So I think that the smaller payments will be pushed out to the payment layer, to Lightning. The multisig transactions will move to these more efficient formats. So for the middle term, probably block space will remain relatively abundant. But we will, if payments continue to grow, and I mean, conferences certainly seem to grow, then we will always have some demand. And what last year showed, I think, is that transacting on Bitcoin is valuable enough for a lot of people that they were willing to pay significant fees. And we have at least 2 more halvings or so until the subsidy is going to start to be really small.
It sounds like a typical market, a free market economy where you have limited supply or I guess maybe a variable supply and a variable demand. And if the demand ever exceeds the supply, then sure, the prices go up. This is just basic economics. But will we ever see a time where the demand constantly exceeds the supply and the mempool is just constantly full and transactions are getting priced out essentially?
Well, one thing I want to add, sorry to steal a bit, is demand is not just comprised of how many people are using Bitcoin to send money, right? And this goes further than just like, oh, some of it's happening on Lightning, which we don't see on chain, or a lot of it is happening on Lightning actually. And as you alluded to, there's plenty of ways that wallet developers can save users money simply by making smaller transactions. There are so many advancements, at least that I know, that exist in the Bitcoin Core wallet and can be used to save users money. And in the enterprise world as well, to batch payments or fee bump in a more smart way. Shout out to CardCoins for doing batched RBF payments. That save users money. So like, I don't think block space or like demand for block space necessarily shows you how many people are transacting with Bitcoin. That's my main point. Because I think when people see empty blocks or when they see like an empty mempool, they're like, oh, nobody's using Bitcoin. And that's just not true.
Right. But also to elaborate on that is that, again, when block space is cheap, people will use it. When it's very, very expensive, people feel pain and they try to solve it in different ways, right? And we talked about that. You can,
That takes time.
a ton of optimizations, and I mean, we've seen massive improvements in optimizations in the mempool over the past 4 years. I mean, it was originally interesting because it was so hilariously bad, right? And now nobody's doing any hilariously bad stuff.
It
right?
was funny, right? How batch transactions were sort of starting mid-2017, and then after that huge spike in 2017, a lot of people very quickly started rolling that out, right?
Right, and that's of course because users are heavily incentivized to optimize their use of Bitcoin's blockchain space, right? Once those fees spike up, yeah, let's prioritize that SegWit implementation, right? Or let's move our low value transactions to layer 2s, and that's when we saw a huge Lightning adoption too, right?
But so that's and so there's a upwards pressure, which is Bitcoin is growing and there is more of everything, right? But there are downwards pressures, there are optimizations, there's other solutions, you know. Someone might say, hey, but you know what, we can actually solve this particular thing in a centralized way and it moves off of there. There's a lot of different ways of achieving you know, the same goal, right? And so when the price is high, that creates an incentive for someone to rethink of it. I mean, I've always expected there to be a Bitcoin payment service provider at some point that just like takes Bitcoin here, completely centralized, like takes some Bitcoin here, sends the Bitcoin there, and just does it all on chain. But it still hasn't happened. You know, we've been so. I mean, these things will probably start happening when, especially during this, because the mempool moves. It doesn't grow nice and steady. It moves in extreme spikes. Right?
Yeah, when the market's pumping hard, everyone wants to move their money to exchange
Yes.
and withdraw.
And there's a lot of stuff that's algorithmic here in terms of fee estimation and a bunch of other things. So oftentimes it's not even a human. Where like there's bots that will send from one exchange to another exchange.
And I think the coffee transactions are getting priced out of Bitcoin, right? And that's like the future of Bitcoin is that we migrate to this multi-layer ecosystem where sometimes you use Lightning or Liquid or some custodial service, right?
Well, it might. I mean, you'd be surprised with how many really small transactions there are still happening on chain. I mean, I agree. I mean, I'm a mega Lightning fan. I want to move it to Lightning, but a lot of people use on-chain Bitcoin for really small transactions, and they'll, you know, even at 1 cent per byte, they pay like a pretty high percent of the value to make
In a
that
way,
transaction.
All right, guys, I guess we're out of time for our panel, but thanks for sharing your very passionate opinions on the state of the mempool and the future of the mempool. I guess that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you.